Okay, hello everybody. This is the virtual conference live talks with me, Dov Benyaacov Kurtzman, and I have a special guest, a very special guest as a personal guest, and I'll tell you why in a few minutes. But we're just going to wait a couple of minutes before we bring him on, just to see who's going to join on as Facebook Live and YouTube. Have a delay, and it takes some time to notify everybody that we're on live. So Richard is in the green room, but before we actually get into it, we'll just see who joins on. So if you are joining in from Facebook, just put it in the comments that you're here, and then we'll know everything's working and we know that you've showed up, and tell us where you're coming in from. So if you're coming in from YouTube, tell us you're coming in from YouTube. If you're coming in from Facebook, then Facebook. So we already have Norman Evans coming in. Greetings from Toronto. So there you go. Already somebody coming in from Canada. So that's wonderful. So we expect an international audience tonight. We have two special guests tonight. This will be finishing off our first semester, you could say. We've been going for just over 2 weeks, I think now, and we're going to be finishing off before the holiday break, and we'll be coming back on the 19th of April, and then we've got a daily show on the virtual conference with all sorts of interesting and wonderful wise people that hopefully will be able to give over to us their wisdom. And of course, remember, this is not a podcast chat show kind of thing. This is a mini nano workshop. So basically, the idea is to be as experiential as possible, even if it's just in this short time, just to help us in this very surreal world that we're living in at the moment. So I see that people are coming on. Just give us an idea where you're coming from. So here we have Naftali. Naftali is coming in from Jerusalem. So hi, Dov. Naftali here from Jerusalem. So we've got Canada, we've got Jerusalem coming in. So don't forget, please, just as we're waiting, before we actually bring our guest on, is to please share, like, tag, do a watch party, whatever you can do to get the word out, get as many people in tonight as possible before we bring our special guest on. Surreal times. This is Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, is in hospital. And so for people living in the UK, and I suppose from around the world too, when a world leader is in hospital because of what the virus that's going on at the moment, this adds a little bit to our distress. And so hopefully we will be able to at least give some sort of skills or words of wisdom that we can possibly give tonight to help us along with that, along with everything else that's going on. We're having economical difficulties, whether it's family, living in the family with the house, different people in the house living in kind of a submarine situation, all sorts of different aspects of distress that we might be dealing with. Of course, on the other side, there might be people that are seeing opportunity out of this, that are seeing the fact that they can spend more time with each other and so on. So obviously that's fantastic. But we're here to try and bring you some, I suppose, words of wisdom, or more importantly, some sort of skills that we can incorporate into our daily lives just to help us get through this. So we've had wonderful guests on so far who've always given us even just a little bit of a golden nugget that we've managed to already put it into practice in our daily lives trying to get through this. So don't hesitate. Please put in the comments where you're coming in from. So we've got here Avi. Avi, this is Avi Garilli from Jerusalem. So we've got two from Jerusalem. Fantastic. So please share, like, and tag so that we can get this show on the road and get in here as many people as we possibly can. Yeah, I just see that some people are putting up hearts and all sorts of blue likes and things. So yeah, get into it, get into the atmosphere, and we'll bring Richard on in about 30 seconds time. And it's his show, really, not mine. So if you can, please share, like, tag, and do a watch party. Get as many people on here as possible so that we can share what we're offering tonight in this virtual conference. Okay, so welcome everybody to the virtual conference live talks. My name is Dov Benyaacov Kurtzman, and we have a very special guest tonight from the United Kingdom. It's very special for me personally because Richard Bennet was my very first formal teacher in ACT. One of a trilogy, one of three people, Jim Lucas and Joe Oliver. But the first person I really came into contact with Richard Bennet from Birmingham University here in the United Kingdom. And I flew over from Israel and spent a whole full week in Birmingham learning ACT at Birmingham University, headed up by Richard Bennet. So it's a very special place in my life. That was about 6-7 years ago already. And from there was no looking back, and the rest is history, as they say. So a big thank you from me to Richard Bennet for being really an anchor in my life, because ACT for me wasn't just about learning some information. It certainly wasn't at that time even in my head to start using it to help other people. I was doing it part of my master's degree, but I was basically in a whole part of my life that I was doing kind of self-development, self-help out of 30 years of living in a different lifestyle, and I wanted to have a higher quality life. So I went down that road of learning acceptance and commitment therapy by the advice of my supervisor at Cardiff University, in the medical school, actually, when I was doing my master's in psychiatry. So I came across Richard Bennet, and I phoned him up, and I basically said, can I come to your ACT week? And he was very welcoming. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in Richard, and I'm not going to introduce him formally. I'm going to ask Richard to do that for himself, because he'll be able to give us up to date exactly who he is, what he's doing, and then we'll move straight into it. So without further ado, Richard Bennet. Hello,
Hi,
Richard.
Dov. Hi. Thank you for that very warm welcome.
Thank you very much for coming along. This is really a special occasion for me, as I said to everybody, because you were the first formal person that I came across, formal teacher, and I have something in my life which is to really respect my teachers. I learn from everybody. I learn from my own students. I learn from my children, but my teachers are something very special to me as part of the tradition of how I was brought up. And so you're my first formal teacher in acceptance and commitment therapy. So thank you very much for agreeing to come on tonight.
You're welcome. Yeah, I think you came to the very first Birmingham ACT Week. It was the inaugural one, and I can remember that thing when you try and do something that's important to you. Like so, I wanted to put together a systematic training in ACT, because there was very little like that in the UK at that time. And I can remember going to my boss and saying, look, I've got this idea. I want to do this thing. I want to do a week's worth of ACT training. And just remember absolutely terrified that nobody would turn up. And then so when you turned up and you come all the way from Israel, I felt kind of vindicated in a way that we'd done something that was useful. So it's really nice that we're sort of still in touch all these years later.
Wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. To be in touch and to meet up at the different conferences, the one in Edinburgh that we met up, and then again. So that's wonderful. The community of ACT. Now we've got some people coming in here live, and I want to it's just interactive, so I want to really bring them in, as you see. So we've got Maayan here coming in, also from Israel, from Hod Sharon. She's I know her. She's a great therapist, a great actor, one of my students even. And so thank you, Maayan, for writing in. So please share, like, tag, and share this as a watch party. Just get as many people on as possible. So thank you for that, Maayan. So Richard, basically the idea is to get together, not for a very long time. It's not a big, fancy chat show that's going to go on for an hour or anything like that. Basically, I wanted this to be as practical as possible. It's almost like if we could come in the room with you and have some sort of experiential experience, I suppose is the best way to do it, that would help us with this very surreal very surreal world we're living in at the moment. I mean, how about you personally? I mean, you're in the UK, same as me, so we're on this lockdown. We're going into the third week. How do you personally get through this?
Well, I was thinking about this and like your idea of a kind of nano workshop, and I was thinking, what would I do if I could distill like everything I've learned, maybe about ACT into a sort of one, I don't know, like a pithy one-liner or something that would easily fit into a short space of time and could be translated. And I often joke that this thing, which is, I didn't make it up, I begged, borrowed, and stolen this from like everything in ACT, and the wonderful generosity of the community. It's hard to remember where you got ideas from because they're spread around so much. But I think it comes down to kind of one sentence, which you probably heard before, which is that in your pain you find your values, and in your values you find your pain. There's nothing that tells you so much about what it is that's important to you as that which distresses you. And so I think one of the things I try and remember, and I will be the first to hold my hands up and say I'm absolutely not perfect. I've not nailed this at all, but to try and notice, tune in and notice my distress or discomfort, and then try and think, well, so what is that telling me about what it is that's important? And that's based on the idea that I think we hurt where we care. We care and we hurt about the same things. And so why is this pandemic so distressing to us? Why is physical distancing so distressing to us? It's because we value social connection. We're social primates, and it's one of the most aversive things we can do to someone. We do it in prison, don't we? It's the worst thing in prison, to put someone in solitary confinement. And so we are in this sort of little individual prisons, aren't we? And the thing which makes us tick as a species is sort of taken away from us, or certainly made much more difficult. And I think it's important to try and remember, this is only distressing because I care so much about social connection and interaction with other people. And in a way, I suppose one of the skills is to learn to welcome that. Really, it's like I'd rather have this pain than not have it. Imagine I was confined to solitary isolation and I felt nothing. I wouldn't want that. It's at least as difficult as it is. It's a reminder that there are things that really matter to me and things that I really care about. Certain connections with certain people have been made much more difficult, and that's distressing. And it reminds me how much I care for those people.
And you're at home, I take it, and you are, you got your family with you, or are you on your own? What is your personal situation? How are you handling this on a day-to-day basis?
My personal situation is complicated, but there are certain family that I can be close to, certain family that I can't be close to, but there's other things as well. Like outside of family, there's work colleagues. I'm really lucky that at university, for example, I have a really lovely team of people that I can't see any of them. My students that I care for, I have a cohort of students that are with me for a year, and one of the great joys of the job is seeing them sort of slowly develop their skills as therapists. And now, I actually don't know whether I'll see them until they graduate. It's very possible that I won't see them, until the end of term is in July, and we won't get together again. And we're doing everything online, which is okay, and it's not the same. So there's lots of personal connections within and without of my family that I'm noticing missing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the tradition that I come from, a teacher is like a father, and there's certain wisdom in that, and I know from myself, your students. There's a real emotional and spiritual and physical connection with who you're teaching, and so I can imagine as a person in your standard, I'm nothing as a teacher compared to you, but you're a university You pass on the information at its best. You have these students that are coming to enlighten their lives with what you've got to teach them. To have that separation actually must be quite difficult, I would imagine.
It is, yeah, it is. I'm reminded, I'm often reminded of this. It's always become a bit of a cliched thing that I say in teaching and training, but I often say to students, like, if you're only ever going to read one book, you could read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I don't know if you've come across it.
Yeah, I've come across it, and we've been talking about it a lot for the last couple of weeks as well. It's very significant, I think, for today.
Yeah, and it's I think it's that thing, isn't it? So Viktor, for people aren't aware, Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist who was in concentration camps during Second World War, survived 3 years in Auschwitz and other places. And I could think, we think about this situation and how constrained it is, and how many of the freedoms that we normally enjoy are just not available to us. It's hard to think of a more constrained situation than being interned in a concentration camp without knowing whether you're going to live beyond the end of the day, death and destruction and cruelty all around you. And one of the things that comes through from his book is that despite all of that constraint, people still have the power to choose who they want to be. And so, he talked about seeing people kind of choosing to die. The light would go out of their eyes and they'd be dead by the end of the day because the pain of it was all too much. He saw people choose to kind of support the regime and take on a kind of enhanced prisoner status in return for greater rations and a better chance of survival. And then he saw people choose to give their meager daily ration of bread to someone else and give it away because somebody else needed it more. So it's like, even if all of the freedoms that you enjoy are taken away from you, you still have the power to choose who you want to be in that moment. So I think it's a great sort of message for adversity, this idea of tuning into your values and thinking, well, I can't choose this. I can't choose this situation. We can't choose. None of us would have chosen coronavirus. None of us would choose these physical distancing measures. And you can choose who you want to be in the face of it.
So
I think just to add one thing, slight different situation, but there was a colleague of ours within the ACT community who developed cancer at a very young age and sadly passed away. And he used his last few months to document, sort of through an ACT lens, what it was like to sort of face his own mortality. And one of the things that, he said many things, but he left some really nice messages for the training community. And one of them was was one sentence that has always stayed with me, which is, none of this was my choosing, and it's my responsibility how I face it.
Right. And it is our responsibility at the end of the day, how we respond to what's going on. And we've had great sessions, I would call it, with different people that have come on here before you. Well, if we were in the room with you now, right, and we were saying to you, look, we're living in a bit of a scary world at the moment. There's an unknown thing that there's no end game from what we understand at the moment. Nobody's come up with the actual plan. They're working on it, but we don't know how long we're going to be confined in this situation. We've got all sorts of worries, whether it's emotional ones, family ones, economical ones, health ones, physical ones, so there's a whole new situation we're living in, because we're not just in a strange situation in one aspect of our life. It's actually something that the world has never actually gone through before, where it's actually affecting every single part of our lives, and the countries are really closed down. So we're sitting in the room with you saying, we're working on high revs, our tempers are getting a little bit shortened, our tolerance is lowering, and we don't want to have trouble with our families and our children and our spouse and whoever else we're in with, or we might be on our own and we don't want to have trouble with ourselves. What can we do, at least in what can you teach us to do now that could possibly, won't take it away, obviously, but help us manage that situation?
One of the, related to the question that I posed earlier about kind of asking yourself, who do you want to be? You know, what do you want to stand for, and who do you want to be in this moment, faced with all of the constraints that we have? Well, I'm a bit of a geek, as you know, and one of the things that I have a interest in from a perspective of something geeky called relational frame theory is this idea of perspective taking. How can you shift your context so that you can perhaps relate to something differently? One of the things I like to do is to engage clients that I work with in perspective taking exercises. One of the things I might ask you to think about, maybe how would it be? Would you be okay if I asked you this question and then you responded, and this would be like almost like a little live demo?
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah,
go for it.
So, like, what if we could sort of I'd ask you to call to mind. I mean, I don't know where you are, but imagine if you're in a room somewhere, I guess. If you could
in Manchester at the moment.
Okay, so if you could look across the room that you're in, and you could imagine a chair in front of you, and sat in that chair is an older, wiser version of you. So perhaps you 5 years in the future, when we're in and out of the other side of this whole pandemic, coronavirus. Like, do you remember 2020? Do you remember all that stuff? How strange that was. Yeah. I wonder if you could picture this older, wiser version of you sat there right now. I wonder what you would like him to be able to say about how you faced this. Like, what would you like him to say? So, like, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember 2020. I remember all of that stuff, and I remember the kind of qualities that I brought to it. What would you like him to be able to say?
What would I like? I think I'm really going to go into this. All right, this is a real play. This is not playing around, because I want to get benefit from this as well for myself. So, yeah, I want to say that even though it was a bit scary, and I actually didn't go out more. I didn't go out my home because I was scared of some sort of poison that was going on outside, even more than this social distancing. I was frightened. I was frightened to go out then.
Right.
But yet, I want to be able to say that, even though that was there and it was scary, and I had lots of dilemmas, how to behave during that time, that I actually got up in the morning and got out of bed and did things that I think could help myself and help others. Okay. And just as simple as that, just get up in the morning and carry on somehow and make my life normal in some way.
So you'd want him to be able to say that despite your fear, you didn't allow that to get in the way of you being the person that you want to be. You didn't let anxiety stand in the way of you being that person that sort of wears that badge of, says that I stand for helping people. That's what I want to do with my time. Even if I can't do it in the way that I want to do it, I'm still going to find another way to do it.
Yeah. Helping people is something that's really important to me. Wasn't always. I was always a rescuer. Right. I was
Right.
that kind of person. I am. I always did think my whole life I was a soldier. I was a policeman. I was always helping that sense, but
Mm.
not in an emotional way. Right.
Yeah.
So I never really got that connection with people, and I stayed
Mm.
away from it. So, yeah, I that has been a value of mine since I started learning about myself and ACT and all this kind of stuff, and
Okay.
other methods. And so that is really important to me. But at the same time, I do acknowledge that I have my own fears and my own threats and my own, um, I'm not perfect in any way, and I'm far
Mm.
from it, and I'm still learning everything. But I do feel things in my body. I've gone through all sorts of traumas in the last 10 years.
Mm.
You talked about family complications. Well, I could do a PhD on my family complications. So, there's a lot of trauma underneath. There's a lot of fear underneath, and this is just, I didn't need this at that time back in 2020. But yet, despite all that, just like you said, I
Mm.
still wanted to get up and do things that I felt in a different form. Yeah, in a
Mm.
different form,
Mm-hmm.
but really doing the same function of trying to help people somehow.
Yeah. Okay. So so here's the thing. I mean, you touch on a really interesting point there, which I think is that that idea of if you know your value. There's a great, you will have seen it as part of ACT Week, and I'm sure lots of people who've been through ACT training have seen it. That great video by Michael Jr., the American comedian, that he says, once you know your why, you've got options on what your what can be. And so if I decide, like, I want to be remembered as the guy who went west, I've got loads of places I can go on my journey west. If you want to be known as the guy who helped people, you've got so many options on how you can do that. That maybe all of those options aren't available to you right now, and you've done this, right. You've found some other way of acting on helping. So I think that would be one of my kind of messages for people, that, like, if you can just work out what it is that you want to stand for, if you could take that future perspective, how would you like to look back on this time? What would you like to be able to say about how you stood, in the face of all of this difficulty? And if you can boil that down to something like a value, like helping, a freely chosen quality of your actions, if you can figure that out, usually it gives you tons of options on how you do it. You might not be able to do it in the way that you want to do it, but you can do it in another way, which it feels like that's what you're doing. And come back to you're not, you're doing it for you now, but you're also doing it for him then. What you do now is investing in that guy, and that, but you want to be able to do that, so that guy can look back on this time and say that I did what I thought was right.
Yeah, I like that bit you said at the end about, what we're doing now is for now, but it does really influence what we're like later on, doesn't it? What we do now is the seeds of what we become later on. I absolutely, and it's nice to be reminded of that as well. And I think also, taking on what you just taught us, is that we could also do that on a daily basis as well, couldn't we? What is important to me on this daily basis when I look back, what did he do that day? That, just even down to that simple, what did I do today that I feel proud of myself that I managed to do back then in 2020 on that.
And I think one of the things here as well is I often think about, like, a metaphor that perhaps might be helpful is a bit like a globe, right? So think of various different values you have positioned at different points around that globe. You can't attend to them all at once. That's what a globe is like. If I'm attending to the UK, like, I can't really see New Zealand, and vice versa. Well, that doesn't mean if I'm attending to the UK, I don't care about New Zealand. I can care about all of these different places. I just can't attend to them all at once, and so we have to make some difficult choices. And so you're absolutely right. On a day-to-day basis, you might think, well, today is going to be about helping people, and you know what? Tomorrow, that's going to be about self-care. I'm gonna climb under the duvet and I'm going to watch Netflix all day, because actually that will help me, and that will help me be better at helping people the next day. And I think so. That kind of, it's the heart of ACT, isn't it? This idea of psychological flexibility and just being flexible to the context. And if you notice, this is really grinding me down, I'm really missing people, I feel sad, and I don't feel up to, helping, or whatever it is my value is today, then, maybe just let go of that for today and look after yourself. Was the other cliche, you can't serve from an empty vessel, right? You need to look after yourself in order to help others.
So I like that, because that kind of takes, sometimes we feel guilty, okay, so we've got a value, want to help people. And then there's the kind of, oh my goodness, I've now given myself this responsibility and I have to do it consistently and I have to be there. And then it becomes, if I take a day off or I watch Netflix, or, I've taken, I just stay in bed all day, now I've got the guilt. And so, but that takes that out of that, doesn't it? It says that globe metaphor I like, because you know what? Sometimes you're doing this and you can hold doing something else as well. And it's just as important even. So staying and just taking a day off is important. Doing some other value that you have doesn't mean you have to do it every day for 24 hours a day. You can sometimes do this and sometimes do that. And I like that, because I'm that person that, sometimes I just have to say, no, it's not going to happen today. It's not going to happen today. I'm going to do something else.
And can you be kind to yourself about that?
Well, I'm learning more and more. I never used to be, but I'm learning more and more. Like I'll give you a small example. I'm doing all this with the technology, learning stuff as I go on. Last Friday, I had I do a morning session, every session at 11 o'clock in the morning, and I put everything on. Everything was working the night before, and I've found this a few times. I stick it on in the morning, it's all not working, because a lot of platforms are changing their algorithms and doing the new security things, and it's all changing. And I didn't know what to do, and eventually I just said, look, it's cancelled for today. And normally I would have gone into serious depression about that. No joke. I would have said, oh my goodness, I'm an idiot and this and that. And I would have went to bed, just said that I'm not going to carry on doing this, because this is just too much hassle for me. But I didn't. I put it away. I said, look, I can't do it. I gave myself a day off. I said, look, we'll start again next week. I'm not going to do it on Sunday, which I thought I was going to be doing. I'll just start on Monday, and I'll give myself the 3 days weekend. And lo and behold, by the time Monday came round, I'd already figured out different ways of doing things, got new ideas, new things, and we're back in business again. So, and I feel
back stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, just to bring in a couple of people, we had Vered from Jerusalem that came in. We've also got Norman Evans, who says, "Don't let anxiety stand in the way." Yeah, excellent.
Absolutely. Awesome. Yeah.
And that's important, because it's not about getting rid of the anxiety, which we all kind of tend to want to do, obviously, but it's about not letting it stand in the way. And if it's there, it's there. It's just one of, as they say, to try and befriend it in some way and say, look, maybe there's some value in it, and maybe there's a good reason to have it around, even though it's not very pleasant to have around.
Yeah, I'd say, again, I'm kind of fond of metaphors, as most people in the ACT community are, but it's that, like what Norman says there, like anxiety, it's not the enemy, right? It's not. It's usually, it's there for a good reason. It's there to remind you that certain things are threatening and certain situations might be dangerous. Anxiety, we need that to keep us alive, and it's not the boss either, right? You don't have to do what it says. Yeah. What if you could treat anxiety like a well-meaning friend, a well-meaning but irritating friend, or an advisor, that reminds you, here's this threat, here's that threat, you should be careful about this, that, and the other. And it's like, but it's not the boss. You're the boss. You can say, yeah, right, thanks, anxiety. That's really good advice. I think I will steer clear of that. Or, yeah, I think you're being a bit overly cautious there, anxiety. I am going to do that anyway because I think it's worth doing.
Yeah. And it takes practice. It doesn't come. I always say, you can go to the gym one day and you lift your 5 kilos. It's not about, okay, I've done that and go home. The idea is that you keep lifting it, and then eventually you'll be able to do 10, and then eventually be able to do 15. And so I think also with this, you have to get used to being able to live like that, with saying, okay, I'm going to take my anxiety along with me. At the beginning, it's like, oh, are you joking? I'm full of anxiety. How do you expect me to go through the day with this? But, it's like building that muscle, isn't it? Once you practice it a little bit, your kind of brain kicks in and your body kicks in, and you'll be able to treat it a bit more like a disturbing friend.
In Swedish, they have a lovely word, which I don't think has this kind of direct translation in English, but it's träningsvärk, and what it means is exercise soreness, loosely. It's like that thing when you go to the gym and you come home and it's sore, you don't go to the doctor thinking, oh my God, what's happened to my muscles? You recognize that it's exercise soreness. It's the pain of growth. And so I think it's a useful concept for thinking about psychological pain too. That like you mentioned it earlier, you are trying to do this thing and then it doesn't work. You're full of guilt, or you're full of anxiety about getting the next one right. It's not the enemy. It's just a bit of exercise soreness. It's you're building those value-driven muscles.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great thing to think about. The fact that we can have pain that's actually a result of something that we're doing that's really good and healthy for us as well, and it's not just about something wrong that's going on.
No.
All right, I promised you 20 minutes, and I've gone really over time because you've been amazing, and you've been exciting, and you've been interesting. You've given us a lot of wisdom, and you've given us that idea of going 5 years forward, imagining what you'd be like after all this is gone, and looking back and saying, what was it that, what point of value, what was important to me that got me through this, and how did that affect me to what do I want to stand for when I was back then in 2020? And if it's for the whole period of this coronavirus surreal situation, or even if it's per day, we can do that. Just to, what I want this day to be remembered about when I'm 5 years later, of how I got through this from a valued point of view. So that's been wonderful. As I said to everybody, you were my first teacher, and my colleague of yours, Jim Lucas, will be with us in about a few hours' time. So he's the next guest on the virtual conference, and he was also one of the 3 of my first teachers. In the meantime, Richard Bennet, thank you very much for joining me.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me. You take care.
You too. Stay care, and be healthy.
Stay safe.
Good night for now.
Good night.